This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop. Yeah, stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, you know, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Homework is
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
Good morning. I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber today. Thanks for joining us on the program. Going to have a great show planned for you a little later today. We've got the congressman from the 7th Congressional District, Tim Walberg. He's going to be joining us for a couple of segments. Well, the Syrian refugee situation continues to be in the news. Let's get an update here from the AP. The leader of a Detroit area county has ordered his departments not to cooperate on a project to help the Syrian refugees. That's Oakland County Executive Brooks Patterson saying the refugees, quote, will continue to be infiltrated by those who would harm or kill. He referred to the Paris attacks Wednesday in a letter urging the Pontiac mayor to stop a project that he felt was helping the Syrian refugees. Ismail Basha and others want to turn an old Pontiac school into a community center for the refugees. The surrounding land would be developed for housing for anyone. They've purchased the school and the lots. Patterson, who is a Republican, tells the Associated Press that the county probably has no direct role, but he says he's using his, quote, bully pulpit to turn public opinion against the project. Well, Brooks Patterson isn't the only one who is speaking out on the Syrian refugee situation. Seems like there's plenty of politicians willing to take a bite of that apple. Attorney General Bill Schuette said yesterday that he believes the United States should have a, quote, hopeful immigration policy, end quote. But given the recent terrorist attack in France and global terrorism, quote, we must halt the Syrian refugee process until a full and complete review of the background protocols and procedures is done. Another notable Republican, U.S. Representative Candace Miller, who, like Bill Schuette, has had her name mentioned as a potential gubernatorial candidate in 2018, wrote on her Facebook page that while she supports Snyder's decision to suspend efforts to relocate Syrian refugees, she was, quote, very distressed about Rick Snyder and Lieutenant Governor Brian Kelly pursuing the refugees in the first place. Lieutenant Governor Brian Kelly, interestingly, he was mentioned specifically in her Facebook comments. Just so happens Brian Kelly's also being mentioned as a potential gubernatorial candidate in 2018. Kind of interesting. Already we're kind of just seeing little mentions here and there. We're a long way off, obviously, but interestingly that he's been mentioned. Candace Miller goes on to say, anyone who says we can adequately and safely vet these refugees is wrong because there is no database in Syria and no way to identify who's who. America has a long, proud history of helping refugees from across the globe, she writes, and we will continue to help. However, in doing so, we must make certain that we are not jeopardizing the safety of our citizens. Well, Republicans aren't the only ones who are speaking out on this. We had the House Minority Leader here in the state of Michigan, Tim Greimel, saying that all states should welcome refugees from war-torn countries who are here legally if the federal government is thoroughly and stringently screening them. That screening should ensure that the refugees do not pose any security threat. So the question is, how much power does Rick Snyder really have? So Rick Snyder says over the weekend that we're not going to accept Syrian refugees into this state. But who is he to say whether we should have them in here or not? Well, it just so happens that Pete Hoekstra, who's the former Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said on a taping of Off the Record yesterday that actually governors have, quote, very little power when it comes to deciding where these Syrian refugees go, if they go anywhere at all here in the United States. He said, quote, the statements that were made by folks like Rick Snyder were symbolic from the governor. He went on to say that he also believes that these statements could have some influence on the final decision on where refugees go in the next year of 14 months. But it's really up to the federal government to decide. And if they like the environment that is here in the state of Michigan, we have a heavy Arab American influence in the Dearborn area. Yeah, they're going to come here. It doesn't really matter what the governor says or doesn't say in that regard. Now, the governor happened to be on Fox News yesterday. We had an audio clip. Alex, do we have that audio clip? Okay, well, we're going to play a little bit of an interview that Rick Snyder did later in the broadcast. He was speaking about the latest on that Syrian refugee situation, and we'll have that to you in a little bit. In other news of interest yesterday, we had a group of Michigan State students who were not letting people in to a speech being given by former President Bill Clinton. University President Lou Anna Simon left President Clinton's speech Wednesday night to talk to the protesters who were concerned about institutional racism on campus. Hundreds of people were attending Clinton's talk, but they were blocked from entering the Kellogg Center banquet hall. That's the Big Ten room for those who are familiar with the Kellogg Center. They were blocked by the protesters who were then diverted into a room through a different way. I work for MERS News, and we had our correspondent Tim Skubik there. He said that the folks who were attending the speech were let out to a side door and were allowed to enter the Big Ten room that way, so that there was no direct confrontation with the protesters, who again were demanding that the schools take steps such as creating a Department of African American and African Studies. Now, Bill Clinton says, and during his speech then in East Lansing after that got underway, and without incident, I would add, former President Bill Clinton says, after the Paris attacks, it is more important than ever that citizens, quote, make something good happen, end quote, in whatever way they can. He told the crowd at the Michigan State University Public Service Forum Wednesday that those not in the military can still define their citizenship by service. Clinton says national borders are more like nets than walls, and people make decisions daily that either, quote, bring us together or tear us apart. He received a public service award from the university. This was a new public service award that was created by former Governor Jim Blanchard, who was also in the room yesterday, rather. The school is joining the Clinton Global Initiative University and offering a minor in entrepreneurship and innovation. Clinton also spoke a little about the 2016 presidential race, but joked he can't say whatever he wants since his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, is running for president. So I guess he's got to watch what he says when he's out on the campaign trail. Probably a good idea. Wouldn't want the wife to get mad at you now, would you? We'll be back after this break. I'm Kyle Mullen from MERS, filling in for Steve Gruber.
Genuine Michigan common sense on display every day.
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and games. We got everything you want. How do we know the names? We are the people that can find whatever you may need. If you got the money, honey, we got your disease. Jungle. Welcome to the jungle. I'm
Kyle Mullen filling in for Steve Gruber today. Alex here playing a little Guns N' Roses here for us this morning, going to wake us up, jar us into action. Last segment, I was talking about Governor Rick Snyder being in Las Vegas this week. He's talking with the National Governors Association, and among the things that they're doing is urging President Barack Obama to take some action to either halt this Syrian refugee immigration or accepting of these Syrian, not immigration, but these accepting of Syrian refugees. At least 24 governors are expressing fears about terrorism. He was on the Neil Cavuto show yesterday. We've got a clip of him talking to the Fox News host.
I think it was a positive step in the right direction. I asked 5 different things as part of that call, and I did get responses. What I've also done now is I sent a letter to the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security asking for a written response on these things, because I think it would be helpful to have something.
Governor, what are the 2 big things you wanted addressed? The governors I talked to a man and woman, had said, we want to make sure that we know who's coming in here and there's a paper record. But with a lot of these guys, there is no paper record.
Well, again, they went through a lot of the procedures, but let's get it out in a transparent fashion to the citizens that we can all look at this process and say this is a very robust process. And also ask the question, the reason for the pause is to say, are there any learning experiences from what we're seeing going on now? You're even reporting new developments, right, Neil. Shouldn't we always be looking at new developments to say we can learn from those to make sure we're maintaining security at the same time helping people with shattered lives?
Did anyone yell? Did anyone complain?
Well, I think you could see there was a tense dialogue in a number of cases, but again, I don't view it that way. I want to make this a non-political process, balancing national security with, again, what's made us a great country.
Gotcha.
Shouldn't we be working on that, and shouldn't we get our citizens active and answer their concerns? Because if we can answer their concerns, all of us can be more welcoming to make sure we're keeping the bad guys out.
That's Governor Snyder talking to Neil Cavuto last night. Well, they had a conference call with the president, and that was the conversation. We've got Brian from Southern Michigan on the other end of the line. Brian, you with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. What's on your mind this morning?
He had this, what's going on in our country right now, from the refugees flooding into the border to Black Lives Matter to all this nonsense that's going on in this country, explains those words that Reverend Wright just said. It's kind of like a third world dictator getting picked up by a group of people, sent to America and saying, hey, why don't you become president of the United States of America? That's about what's going on here.
Thanks for your thoughts this morning, Brian. If you want to get in on the conversation, please give us a call. 888-900-9966 is our number. Obviously, Brian's looking for a new president, and as it turns out, we are going to be picking one next year, and the Secretary of State of Michigan earlier this week announced the 14 Republicans and 3 Democrats who are going to be on Michigan's list of presidential candidates for the March 8th primary election. Neither the state Democratic or Republican parties have added names other than the list that that has been published now. Now, candidates will have until December 11th to withdraw his or her name. That also is the deadline for candidates not on the list to file thousands of nominating petitions needed to be on the ballot. Now, at the time this announcement was made, there were 14 Republicans who been accepted, I suppose, as the Republican candidates. However, there are others who are running for the office who do not get the attention of the mainstream media. Either they do not have the money to get their name out, or they are not running from a political position currently. However, that list dropped to 13 with Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal suspending his campaign, essentially withdrawing from the race. So that means there are 13 Republicans on the list, and I guess we'll have to see between now and December 11th who drops out. And I guess if you drop out after December 11th, your name is still going to be on there. Very unlikely you're going to win, however. The 14 Republicans, Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, Lindsey Graham, Mike Huckabee, John Kasich, George Pataki, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Rick Santorum, and Donald Trump. Who's going to be the next one to drop out? Somebody's got to drop out between now and December 11. Who do you think's going to drop out? Give us a call if you're interested in chiming in on that one, 888-900-9966. I've been saying George Pataki, for a long time, former New York governor. But you know what I'm finding here? The trend that we're seeing here is that the people who are dropping out, I'm thinking Scott Walker, Rick Perry, and now Bobby Jindal, these are people who actually had financial resources in the game, like significant infrastructure. And that's why Rick Perry ended up dropping out. He had all this staff, couldn't pay him, and the campaign just kind of collapsed. It was the same thing with Scott Walker. He dropped out right around the Mackinac Island Conference. He dropped out, same kind of thing. He ran out of money, had this huge infrastructure, but he had gotten into the race so late that he had kind of missed his opportunity to get the kind of money he needed to stay in and kind of keep this self-perpetuating machine going. That's kind of the thing that's kind of missed when you're looking at these presidential candidates. It's not who necessarily has the least biggest shot of getting in. Like, there's no way George Pataki's going to be our next president. No way. You know, you can also say, I think it's fair to say, Lindsey Graham isn't going to be our next president. But they stay into the race because they want to keep their name out there. And since they have very low infrastructure, as long as they've got the money to pay the gas bill, get around Iowa, get around New Hampshire, they're going to stay in. Interesting dynamic. We've got some guests lined up after this break. I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber today. We'll be back after this break.
Delivering Michigan's common sense with a big dose of truth and honesty.
And don't forget that there is a someone up above.
I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber today. You're listening to the Steve Gruber Show. Well, on Monday, President Barack Obama labeled the slaughter of the folks in Paris, 129 people dead. He said, quote, "There will be setbacks and there will be successes. The terrible events in Paris were obviously a terrible and sickening setback." I don't know if he wants to take that word setback back or not, but he's obviously taken some criticism for saying that. Joining us on the other end of the line, our first guest today is Bishop Aubrey Shines, the founder of Glory to Glory Ministries in Tampa. Bishop Shines, thanks for joining us today. What do you think of that word setback?
I think, Colin, good morning, and thanks for having me again. I think that Obama and Kerry, these guys say what's really in their heart. First of all, they don't view this as a war, and when you don't view something as a war, you will view it ideologically as a setback. So this guy's perception of Islam, which he is always very, very favorable of and very favorable to, I think is indicative of his language. He does see it as a setback because to go any further logically, you would have to call it what it is, and it's a war on Islamic jihadists. He can't bring himself to say that because to say that would crush his own ideology, his hatred towards Israel, his disdain for America, and I think we're seeing it lived out in his and those who surround him, like his Secretary of State, John Kerry. So I'm not shocked, unfortunately, about it. It just shows his level of ineptness as it relates to him being our chief and commander.
Bishop Aubrey Shines joining us on the other end of the line. Here's the founder of Glory to Glory Ministries. What do you think the president's strategy should be in regards to ISIS?
I think it should be indicative of any great leader, and that is to destroy our enemies. Remember, when he took the Oval Office, he put his hand on a Bible, and he swore to protect us, both from enemies, not just within, but also enemies without. And I won't use the strong language that Donald Trump uses, but I resonate with Donald Trump's position as well as Ted Cruz. I think we should bomb these barbarians into smithereens because to not do it, it is just a matter of time. We're going to see that type of radical behavior manifested right here in this great country. I think this should be a war, and I think he should take those who are trying to kill us, kill our children, kill our lifestyle. He is sworn to eradicate that type of temperament on the globe wherever it impacts us. They are impacting us, Kyle, And for him to do nothing, unfortunately, it doesn't shock me, but sadly, he won't even listen to the generals around him to do such. So it's unfortunate all the way around, but this is what happens when our country elected this horrible, horrible leader that is just not a friend to the very nation that he say he was born in.
You know, I was reading a national publication yesterday. I can't remember if it was New York Times, USA Today, one or the other. They were talking about the governors who have said no to Syrian refugees, or at the very least asked for the pause button to be hit, as Governor Snyder has recently done. I was really struck by the partisan breakdown of these governors. It seems like the Republican governors were all basically unanimous in saying, at the very least, let's hit the pause button on Syrian refugees. The Democratic governor, with the exception of one, the New Hampshire governor who is running for the U.S. Senate, were not taking that strong position. Has this become a partisan issue?
Unfortunately, it has. I was on a TV show the other day, and someone says, well, how dare you as a pastor not show compassion? And they actually liken what was going on in Syria to those who have a belief system of Christianity to Jesus' mother, Mary, and Joseph. I says, wait a minute. Yeah, they were foreigners going into a foreign place, but the last time I checked, they were not terrorists set out to destroy us. So, I mean, this notion that we're playing politics now, Kyle, this is real dangerous stuff. Mm-hmm. We're playing politics to a group of thugs who have already infiltrated Paris. We already know for a fact that one of the Syrian murderers, barbarians that killed the Parisians there in that part of Europe, was a Syrian refugee. And our own FBI directors, they're telling us we have no way to really validate and vet who these individuals are. We cannot call their consulate and or their government and ask Assad, hey, are these good or bad guys and girls? And for them to be playing politics here in America with our lives, God forbid if something were to happen and their children were to be hit and or destroyed, I wonder would they have the same political dynamic working through them then. It's unfortunate, and kudos to every governor that says, let's put a pause on this and let's do this the right way. And if we can't, let's set up camps, Kyle, over there. Let's pour some money in over there in their own home, or assimilate them in countries that they would be more familiar with, I think would be a better thing than bringing someone here that we can't even vet. That's really, really political correctness going awry, unfortunately.
Now, how much do you think this has to do with the Syrian refugee situation? Is it just possible that the terrorist bombers were Syrians? I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here, because you look at the country of Germany, and they have accepted Syrian refugees with open arms. You haven't seen any terrorist attacks in Germany.
Well, we haven't seen it yet. That's for sure. We've not seen it yet. And I think one of the difference in a place like Germany, and again, I know we've been allies even though we spied on them, the reality of it is that we've not seen these things manifest yet. And then secondarily, United States, we have always been the leaders as far as our humanitarian deeds that go into helping others, whether it's a man-made cause, and in this case, and or some sort of, nature dynamic that kind of decimates an area. So even though we've not seen it, what we have seen in those areas and all throughout Europe, we're seeing individuals in Europe that are trying to force, as they are in England right now, Sharia law. We're seeing just an uptick as it relates into what is called honor killings, because when their sons and daughters move into those regions, the moment that they adopt Western principles, we're seeing the fathers murder the children. And so we're seeing these things lived out because they're not assimilating. And I think we need to be very careful. I think what our founders really intended for them to, for us to be a people to bring others in that are weary and tired, I'm sure they did not mean those who desire to kill us.
Now, we have a strong Muslim community, a strong Arab American community here in Michigan, in the Dearborn area. So obviously, there would be some appeal for those folks to come to Michigan. They'd already have kind of an infrastructure in place up here. They already have people kind of speaking their language. Are you saying no to Syrian refugees in general? Is there any way to vet them?
No, at this point, there is no way to vet them. And I've been to your area a gazillion times for a million different reasons. And again, those who desire to assimilate into America is a beautiful thing. This is at heart who we are. But we're talking a different dynamic right now. If you cannot vet, Kyle, an individual that comes into your personal home, if you don't know whether or not that individual is there to bring you and your family harm, I think you and your listeners would conclude it's probably not best to bring them in. It's not that you're probably not a great hospitable guy, but if someone has already vowed, we're going to kill you, Kyle, we're going to destroy your family, and we're going to, the way
we got to let you go here. We got to let you go here. Bishop Aubrey Shines, founder of Glory to Glory Ministries. We'll be back.
Taking a closer look at the stories that affect you most with a big dose of common sense.
You're listening to the Steve Gruber Show. I'm Kyle Mullen, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in today. Steve's out in the woods trying to take down a deer or two. Over in St. Clair County, hunters have discovered a human skull and several bones. Sheriff's Deputy Steve Campow said hunters were tracking a deer when they made the discovery Monday on state land in Birchville Township, about 15 miles north of Port Huron. The remains will be examined by an anthropologist at Michigan State University. No identity or cause of death is known. Investigators are checking the missing persons database, see if they can't find out who those bones belong to. Let's hope Steve doesn't come upon that kind of luck. Well, let's go back here to the Syrian refugee topic that we've been talking about the last few segments. Joining us on the other end of the line is Charlotte Allen. She's a fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kyle.
So the latest terrorist attacks in France, or in Paris, France, by radical Islamists remind us that we live in deadly serious times, doesn't it?
It sure does. And, of course, there's the whole irony that on our campuses, our college campuses, students are demanding safe spaces, not seeming to realize that once you grow up, the world is not a safe place. It's crazy. It's as though the Paris massacres never happened.
And here in East Lansing, that's pretty, it's a great segue. We had dozens of Michigan State students who were protesting the Bill Clinton speech, standing in front of this hall, not letting people come in. Basically, I had to open a side door to let the folks, about 500 people who wanted to listen to Bill Clinton, had to go in through the side door in order to avoid these protesters. A bit of a disconnect right now.
I think there is. It's really crazy. There have been tweets coming from the University of Missouri or people who claim to be students there complaining that there's too much attention paid to this massacre, this little old massacre in Paris. Why aren't they paying attention to our grievances? And it's just crazy. It's as though students aren't living in the real world, and obviously they're not, because they can't see that the real world is not safe. It's a place where there are bad people who want to do really bad things to people, not just commit a few microaggressions, as the students call them.
Now, I saw that there was a terrorist attack that was foiled just recently in Australia. And here in the United States, when terrorist attacks are snipped at the bud or because of our work here at the federal government, they don't come to pass. We don't hear about them. Do you think that we are still susceptible of some type of attack?
Oh, I think so, very much. And we're going to see some of this, I think, with this crazy policy of Obama's of simply letting people who claim to be refugees into our country en masse. In fact, the latest Drudge headline says that 3 or more Syrians were arrested at the Texas border. We have people coming into our country who don't share our values, who don't like us, who resent Western civilization. And I think that I think we're simply going to be made more vulnerable. And there have been some occasions of attacks that were clearly motivated by jihadist sentiment. and there's no reason why they're not going to take place in the future.
A vast majority of these Syrian refugees are not terrorists, though. I mean, you would concur with that. Shouldn't we have some empathy toward them? Isn't there something we should be able to do for these folks who are trying to escape this war-torn region?
Well, some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. I mean, a lot of them are basically people looking for a better life or maybe for welfare, some social programs for them. I agree that most of them obviously aren't terrorists. I mean, every time there's a terrorist attack, you have a handful of terrorists, but you do have a lot of people who either sympathize with the terrorists or really think that the West had it coming or whatever. This is a sign of weakness on the part of the West. So I think that we just have to say no at this point, and maybe at some later point. There's a lot that we can do for people in war-torn regions. We can help them materially. We can make it easier for them to settle in countries that are a little bit closer to their borders. It's not a really, are we going to let people die versus are we going to accept tens of thousands of people in our country, into our country.
We're talking with Charlotte Allen. She's a fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. In the last segment, we had Bishop Aubrey Shines from the Glory to Glory Ministries. We talked about the political divide this has created. Why has this become a political issue where it seems like the Republicans are the ones saying no and the Democrats are siding behind the president and saying we need to be a bit more sympathetic here?
Well, we have a Democratic president, I mean, obviously, and who never ceases to pass by an opportunity to make political hay out of a difficult situation. This is a time when the country ought to be standing together as the French are standing together. They've got a socialist president, but basically the French are presenting a pretty unified front. We're not, so it has turned into something extremely partisan, with Democrats accusing Republicans of hate and Islamophobia and so forth. But I think the blame can be placed squarely on Obama's shoulders. He's made no effort to bring us together at a very difficult time.
Charlotte Allen, we've only got about 30 seconds left. Do you see this issue being an issue that will stick around for the 2016 election?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be the issue for the 2016 election. I think that it's really what's on people's minds. We have a volatile situation in the Mideast that's not going to go away, so it's going to be there.
All right, very good. Charlotte Allen, fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. I'm Kyle Malin, editor of the MERS newsletter, filling in for Steve Gruber as he's out in the woods. We'll be back after this break with more with the Steve Gruber Show.